another video on Nifi. This time we're going to look a little deeper on how a Nifi process is written in code. Um, we'll first examine some basic aspects of a processor and see how the same is coded um, in the Nifi Git project. So when you take any processor, we have the name of processor. Um, we have properties that we can configure. In this case, we are looking at the log attribute processor, and the processor has relationships. This is how it can connect to other processors. In this case, we have only one relationship called success. And then like every property has some description, how to configure the property. Now let's look at the code here, right? I have downloaded Nifi code from GitHub. So the same processor you see, it's the log attribute processor. And on the top, you will first see a number of properties being defined that includes like log level, log payload, and so on. We'll look at this a little bit deeper in some time. And then the if you go down a little bit further, um, the relationships are also defined. The success relationship, which we get to see here in this tab, that's also defined here. Um, and then whenever a flow file is ready to be processed, a method has to be called on this class, right? So for that, it requires implementing a method called onTrigger. So this is if you find any basic process implementation, these are some of the aspects you would see: the properties, the relationships, and the main method that handles flow file. Now, let's look at some of this in a little bit depth. So take a property like log info. So some properties are mandatory. So a property is defined by um, creating a builder of property descriptor, and eventually you're building it and you're getting a property descriptor. Now here, some properties are required, some are not. In the case which ones are required, you see them in bold. And properties can have default value. You can see like when we configure log attribute, these are automatically having defaults, right? Here log level has info, log payload has false. Yeah, you see log payload has default value false. And there are descriptions, right? So if you look at the log level, it says the log level to use when logging the attributes. So if you hover on this question mark, you would say the same. So basically what's written in code is used to render the description of this property on the UI. Um, and many of these will come with their own validators in terms of which values are allowed. Some of the newer Nifi ones, they even allow you to check the properties before you start the processor. Like you can click on that. Yeah, so that's about properties. So once you have defined properties, you have to basically add all these properties into a list, and that will be automatically discovered and used by the Nifi framework. And here you define the order. So here we say, let me close this and open back again. You say log level is the first property, second one is payload, and so on. And you would see that ordering is based on how you add it to the list. Right. Now, with the relationship, some processors can have one or more relationships. In this case, we have only success, which means all the flow files that are successfully processed by this processor would be sent to this relationship, and then any processor consuming from this relationship would process the successfully processed flow files from this processor. So we, we have to declare this relationship. It's called success, and this is a very basic description you would find for all. And as I told before, this is the same relationship you find here. Now, as you also notice, this is the init method. After the class is initialized for this particular processor and then called for the first time, the init method is called. This is when you register all your relationships and properties. Now, let's look at what happens when you are ready to process a flow file, which means, let's say, in our uh, diagram here, we generate a flow file, it goes through intermediate processor, and then the flow file comes here. So whenever this processor is ready to process a flow file, um, then the onTrigger method is called. So let's look at onTrigger. Um, in onTrigger, if we go back to configuration, we can understand this better. So um, the onTrigger basically it is trying to get a flow file. It can have a number of flow files waiting in the queue. It picks up one, and then it processes the flow file, and the same flow file is sent through the success relationship so that it can be processed by the next processor in the chain. So here we look at this process flow file. So here um, we have this one of these properties saying how do you want to print the output. Do you want to print it with, a line per attribute and so on, right? S- so you can see that is actually being implemented here, right? So based on a particular format that you want to print the output, uh, the logic is here, right? If you want to print every attribute of a flow file per line, and that is here. Now, you would have noticed in the log attribute processor that um, attribute keys are printed by default. So, but you need to decide which attribute keys are actually being printed. So that's based on another method which determines based on what attributes are available in the flow file and which attributes you want to print based on the configuration here. It comes up with the attribute keys, and then the same is looped over and printed. And here there is also the option where we want to print the content of the flow file. So if that was enabled to true, then the content of the flow file is obtained, and then it is added to a message. I mean, the message is the final output that would be sent to the logger to print the message, right? A message is nothing but a string builder, because as we process this flow file through various stages, more messages are getting added to the string builder, and eventually they are turned into a string and printed. And then when you want to print the message, you may want to print it at a certain log level, right? So that's what you configure in the first property. If you say info, the message that is now going to be printed is printed in info or in other log levels. So that somewhat concludes the first quick overview into coding, right? So we looked at the essential aspects, including properties, relationships, and some of the important methods like init, onTrigger, and then we looked a little bit more in detail, like how these properties are ordered and declared during the init time and the relationship. And also, we looked at how a flow file is processed, how various of this configuration is read in that method, and then appropriate actions are taken. Uh, that's all for now. Thank you very much for staying with us. See you all in the next video. Bye.